The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, Segment 1 students, to today's class on Venus squared the nodal axis. This is, I think it would be the fourth in our 11-part series on planets square the nodes. So welcome, and I'll turn it over to Kim Marie. I started my recording, and you're welcome to do so as well, Kim.
Mine was set up to start automatic, and why it switched to that compared to last night, I don't know, but oh well. Welcome everyone to our December 2017 Segment 1 class. Today's class is going to be on Venus square the nodes. Before we get started on our material, first of all, our housekeeping slide that you guys have probably some of you are like, oh, really? We got to listen to this? So I'll skip over it, except to tell you that if you're interested in segment 2 on relationships or segment 3 on health and wellness, the material version is 25% off through the end of the month with the coupon code. What was the coupon code, Leroy? Capricorn?
Capricorn.
And on segment 2, you can get the material and digital version 25% off as well. The digital only version of segment 2 is not on sale. Any questions, just contact us at ea.net if you would like to. So first of all, I just want to remind everyone that evolutionary astrology is based upon observe it out there in your environment, in nature, and correlate it to the symbol or the archetype. And here at EA, we understand that a planet and the sign and the house that it rules is one archetype. The sign isn't different from the house, which is different than the planet. That gets into a lot of confusion and gobbledygook, basically, in my world. So the example we have here on the screen is Mars, which rules Aries and rules the first house, is one archetypical principle. And of course, if you're a beginner to astrology, in general, it starts with learning the 12 archetypes. Jeffrey Green always used to say, if you learn the 12 archetypes, you can take it from there and then extrapolate those archetypes into a planet or a sign or a house. Here today, as we look at the Venus archetype, Venus currently rules 2 signs and 2 houses of the zodiac. And just like we learned last month with Mercury, it's the same with Venus. There's an inner side and an outer side. The inner side of Venus is its rulership of the sign Taurus in the 2nd house. And this comes from the polarity of Taurus and 2nd house, or energy returning to the center. The inner side of Venus with Taurus 2nd house, passive polarity, fixed modality, earth element. The outer side of Venus is its rulership of the sign Libra and the 7th house. This is related to the active polarity, which is energy moving outward from the center. Libra in the 7th house being active polarity, cardinal modality, and the air element. So let's start with the inner side of Venus and its rulership of Taurus in the 2nd house as an archetype. One of the things that we will find with both Taurus and Libra is that Venus rules the principle of relativity. And this means relationships. In the Taurus 2nd house sign, it means a relationship with ourself and our environment. It's how we survive in the environment. Taurus in the 2nd house coming after initiation and birth with Aries in the 1st house. So Taurus in the 2nd house will rule survival resources such as food, clothing, shelter, and the talents that it takes from within ourselves to provide for those resources. It also then will rule personal resources, what we value beyond food, clothing, and shelter, and the talents within us that we have to provide for those personal values. A little more on this later, but Venus and the Taurus second house side is also the broad physical and biological survival of the species. So this is where the Taurus second house comes in with strong survival instincts and strong sexual instincts. And on the Taurus side, although survival is going to require the biological act with another, loosely Taurus second house is known as self-sex, whereas the polarity Scorpio in 8th is known as sexual merging with another. The Taurus and second house side of Venus is also the principle of security. Being able to survive means being free from fear from that fight or flight syndrome, that ability to have a shelter, which, millennia ago or hundreds of thousands of years ago would keep us safe from wild animals. So security is very well ingrained in this Taurus second house principle, because it means that we are safe and we have survived. However, sometimes that principle of security can lead to inertia. What will happen is, okay, I'm surviving, I'm okay, and we don't go any further. So it can lead to that distortion where we can minimize how much effort we make. We provide enough to feed ourselves for a day or a week, but we don't put away any food to get us through the winter. It also can then lead to manipulation of others. Manipulation is not just a Scorpio 8th house word. It can come in here through the polarity. We can be manipulative of others who are better at creating resources, and we can relate to them for those resources, or we can manipulate those resources away for ourselves. It also can lead to the distortion, again, of laziness, not wanting to move, not wanting to change. One of the reasons we don't want to change is because by nature itself, change can represent insecurity. The past is secure because it is known. The future is insecure because it is unknown. And so we can have those situations where we have to be prodded out of security to make change. Along with that principle of wanting to be secure and safe, the Taurus second house side of Venus is also that principle of withdrawal. Again, wanting to turn inward, passive polarity. This is a natural reflection from Aries to Taurus. Aries is initiating that birth moment, and Taurus is bringing in then how do I survive? When we go within, though, we are also about discovering what is of value to us, survival and personal. And again, what do we do to sustain ourselves, to survive that fixed modality? So Jeffrey Green's teachings would loosely call this that frog in the well karma. When we have created that environment that we value, that allows us to be safe and secure, its symbolization could be the frog that was at the bottom of the well. And from the bottom of the well, looking up at its little piece of the sky, everything is safe and secure. I have what I need. Everything in my environment feels good. All is well. And again, evolution can become very inertia. So that polarity of Scorpio and the 8th house from time to time will create any necessary cataclysms to push the frog out of the well into the larger universe. And here The degree of resistance can create the degree of cataclysm that will shake us up and push us out into that insecure environment in order to evolve and grow and learn. So one of the real keys here from the Taurus second house side of Venus is to recognize when we start getting those little whispers of messaging. This is that square to Aquarius 11th house. When we start getting those messages about moving, about making a change, about doing something else within our environment. And the more we can listen and hear that message, the more we can make that effort to move, the more we can minimize any needed cataclysm. As we start looking at personal values from Taurus in the second house archetype, you may have heard me say this over the years in various classes because this makes a good example. Looking at the different evolutionary states of consciousness. Consensus values are that physical world. It is the material things. It is the accumulation of the material things. How much money can I create in my bank account? How big can I make my house? How much food can I have in my cupboards? How many pairs of shoes can I own? This is what gives us value. Therefore, it's what we perceive we need and desire. And that then gives us the security in our environment, also gives us the motivation to go out and accumulate those physical things. We continue to accumulate physical things as we expand in consciousness, but their value in and of themselves decreases as we recognize from the individuated state of consciousness that we're learning to value ourself as a resource. Look at my talents. Look at what I can do from the Taurus second house perspective. And as a matter of fact, when you have slower moving outer planets move through Taurus, as Uranus is going to do over the next 7 years, beginning next year, and as the slower moving planets move through our second house, it is a natural time period to expand our talents in helping us with our ability to create whatever physical resources we need or desire in our environment to survive and to flourish. And as we expand into the spirituated state of consciousness, our values then become the ultimate value, which is recognizing universal source as the ultimate value and the ultimate resource that we have in the universe. It also means then that a relationship with universal source in inner relationship and inner connection with universal source is where everything that manifests ultimately comes from. Taurus in the second house through the inner side of Venus is the principle of self-reliance. It is all the self words. I can take care of myself. I can survive. I can provide for all my needs. I can provide for all my desires. Included in this is a relationship with ourself, self-relating. So this will bring along self-love, self-acceptance, self-worth. And when we have that healthy sense of self, it allows us to go out and survive and flourish easier and easier and easier. It also provides for us a foundation from which to relate to others, as we'll discover as we look at the Libra 7th house archetype, the outer side of Venus. So when we are not in healthy relationships with that polarity, Scorpio 8th house, many times the relationship won't work out and we get thrown in back upon ourselves to learn this Taurian lesson of self-reliance. As we look at Jupiter transiting through Scorpio over this next year and most of 2018, there will be periods of time that we will cyclically be thrown back in upon ourselves, whether we are in a relationship on an intimate level or not. Even in intimacy, we can get thrown in back in upon ourselves. Our partner shocks us because she says, I need to change. And it may not be the end of the relationship, but they need some pattern or some value, some way of relating that they want to change. And it so shocks again that security-based Taurus second house that it throws us back in upon ourselves. So we will continually, again, work upon self-love, self-acceptance, all of those inner relationship issues through the inner side of Venus. It is also the principle of determining what our essential needs are, recognizing what we need and desire from our values. As we looked at consensus individuating and spirituating values from above, Venus equals values. And if it's important for you to have a fancy new car, you're going to value that. You're going to perceive you need one, and your desire is going to help you figure out how to get one if you possibly can. If your values include, I want to have an intimate relationship, you will perceive that as a need, which becomes the desire, and then you go forth trying to find that intimate partner. Values will cover not only survival needs, but also the needs to flourish. Both exist here. Once we can survive food, clothing, shelter, then our needs become, I'm not going to pronounce the word right, superfluous, whatever that word is. Then they become, again, personal values and an essential need from our perspective, but they're needs that allow us to flourish. It's not necessarily something we need to physically survive. So that principle of essential needs includes survival needs and our personal needs from our personal values. Again, in general, it is the principle of all the talents we have within inside ourselves to accumulate resources. If you want to look at this from the principle of reincarnation, it can be the accumulation of talents that we have gained over multiple lifetimes. Someone who can naturally do something, whether they have the formalized consensus education to do it or not. Someone who is a natural engineer and can, figure out space-time and just kind of intuitively understand whether something's going to work or something's going to not work. Someone who can just naturally be good with their hands because they've either built things before with their hands or they've been a masseuse before with their hands. Again, we can have an accumulation of talents from multiple lifetimes as well. Now, the outer Venus, again, rulership of Libra and the 7th house, is also the principle of relativity. Here, that relativity is a relationship with someone outside of ourself. Taurus second house relating inside with ourself and ultimately with universal source. Libra seventh house relating to others outside of us. And because Libra seventh house squares Cancer and Capricorn, I like to say the Libra perspective of relationships is anything beyond a casual acquaintance. So the Libra side of relationships will include an intimate partner, yes, but it will also include your children and your parents and your boss and your coworkers and trying to Aquarius 11th house, all your friends. It is the diversity of relationships that we're going to have. I'll explain more on that later. But here, when we're looking at that principle of relativity or relating to someone outside of ourselves, what happens in that relating is that via Aries and first house polarity, it bounces back to ourself, and through the relationship outward, we reflect back into who we are as an individual. So in relationships with others, we get an understanding of who we are, our sense of ourself, our own individuality in and through and because of that relationship. There's that reflection back to ourself, reflecting inner and outer, relativity, all these relativity words. In this process, it helps us develop a more objective awareness of ourself. It helps us develop an objective awareness of another individual as well. The Libra seventh house side of Venus also will relate to survival of the species because that survival is enhanced through relationships. Human beings learned a long time ago that they survived better together. And when we combined our talents and our skills together, we can create more than what we created all on our own. Just think of, historically when we learned how to tame the planting of the crops and we planted the grains. When it was time to harvest them, the more people you could have in the field harvesting, the faster you could collect the grain before a storm came along or the animals came through and ate it or destroyed the fields, or, God forbid, fire came through and destroyed the crop. So we have learned through eons of time that we do better together. Yeah, we kind of have forgotten it, and we've kind of got into, as we all know, that, me versus you rather than me and you through the patriarchal distortions. But this is still a natural perspective that is underlying the distortions, because natural law can be suppressed, distorted, however, it cannot be destroyed. So we go through waves of time periods where we learn that we survive better together. The Libra seventh house side of Venus is the principle of the psychology of listening. What another individual is communicating to us from their perspective. And that works both ways. Through relationship with another, we learn how to communicate better, and we learn how to communicate from our perspective in wanting another person to wanting another person to understand where we come from. That psychology of listening also helps us understand how reality actually exists for another individual. Here's that objectivity that is coming about again. Instead of the universe being from my subjective perspective, I'm learning how to to step outside of myself here and learn how the universe exists from the perspective of another person. So here we are in general, learning that relativity of human nature. How do humans interact with each other? How do males interact with females? How do females interact with males? How do two females interact with each other? How do two males interact with each other? How do groups of people interact with each other? Broaden it out more and more and more. Another thing that starts to come when we try to learn objectivity in relationships is it brings about what we call that principle of equality. Relating or participating in relationships as an equal giving and receiving. More on that in a bit. So we participate, first of all, in a diversity of relationships in order to understand who or what we are versus who or what someone else is. Just think about back to those values and needs, all right? I may value an intimate relationship where someone else values their freedom. I may value a stockpile of food where someone else values just what they need in the moment. That give and take in relating in that diverse amount of ways in which we relate is always first house Aries polarity, feeding back to ourselves and helping us understand ourselves better as we understand someone else better. Relativity. So it teaches us how to participate in social relationships, depending upon the person or the group we're with, what is okay, what is not okay, some of those standards of right, wrong conduct coming from the Virgo 6th house archetype that came before. You also, again, learning that lesson of objectivity versus subjectivity. When we come from our perspective, we may perceive something as being fair and balanced, but the other person we're relating to may not. So as they speak, and if we can get into that psychology of listening, we're going to evolve how to be in relationship outside of ourselves and learn something more along the perspective of being objective. What is fair for both parties in the relationship involved? What is fair for the group of people in the relationship? Taking everyone into consideration. What is fair for the family unit, taking that into consideration? What we find in our world, in our environment, and a lot of this is due to the distortions of patriarchal principles or human-made conditionings. What we find is that most of our relationships are unequal. They are not equally based, they are unequally based. We have an imbalance in our relationships, and many times an imbalance from that one-on-one perspective. The typical thing that ends up happening is one party to the relationship dominates and one party to the relationship is dominated. The one who is dominating wants to control the other person in order to feel secure. They want to control that outer environment in general that leads to controlling that other person out there in order to feel secure. This helps us understand, going back to the Taurus 2nd house side of Venus, that there is something to be learned yet in the relationship with their self in regards to self-reliance and the inner security. The same is also true with the partner who is willing to be dominated in their relationship. Here they lose their sense of individuality. They get into the needy side. I want you to take care of me in order for me to be secure. We still have a lack of self-reliance, a lack of self-worth. But the one being dominated gets overly involved in that other person because the more I know about them, the more I listen to them, the more I participate in them, the more that then they will take care of me because I'm giving myself to them. So as you can see, with this distortion of inequality in relationships, how it can set up the neediness, the need to be loved, the need to control, how it sets up expectations. If I give to them, then they're going to give me something back, even if it's just a little crumb. How it sets up projections, projecting out there that that person will behave as I want them to in order to feel secure in the relationship. So here again, it comes back to those lessons of learning how to have a relationship based on equality. It is that principle of giving and receiving in relationships. Learning when to give to another person and how to give what that other person actually needs. The objectivity of giving to them what they need versus subjectively giving what we want to give to them. It also brings up that lesson of learning when not to give and when not giving what it is not to give. The needy one who allows themselves to be dominated, if I just give, they will give something back. And how many times have any of you who work with client charts said, when you're starting this relationship, you give, and if you don't receive reciprocal in turn, stop giving. You know, in today's society, you know, it used to be the Pluto and Cancer generation, you know, before World War II, you know, the man asked the woman out for the date. The man paid for the meal. The man, you know, drove the car. We start getting to the Pluto and Libra generation and the modern world today. That can exist in some ways. It's still nice to have the bigger human being open the door, but it doesn't mean that it has to be related back to the gender issues anymore. How many times today when young adults are going out, do they, you know, go Dutch, or do they find some way of having some more equal giving and sharing of the resources, just as an example? When we are learning that lesson of not giving, it is sometimes the greater giving, because as we hold back, then it allows that partner, that other individual, to learn whatever lesson it is they need to learn on their own. I always shorten that up, learning when to give and when not to give, and when the not giving is the greater giving. And that's a tough one to do, because if you have a lot of Venus or Libra 7th house in your chart, you're orientated towards giving. So that holding back and letting someone else learn on their own is a tough one to do. Think about this in terms of the parent and the child always coming to ask for resources rather than being responsible with their own resources and money. How much effort does it take sometimes for that parent to say, I'm not bailing you out this time because you don't learn the lesson? This also teaches us to move from conditional love to unconditional love. Conditional love is just as it sounds. It places conditions on the loving. The one who's being dominated feels that if they give, what they expect back is some love in return, or maybe some resources or security in some way in return. The one who is dominated on that conditional love side can withhold love or withhold resources to get the one they're dominating to give something they want as the dominator. Either direction, it is based upon conditions, expectations, and projections. Unconditional love says, I will love you no matter what. I will give to you what I perceive is best for you, no matter what. I will love you even if you perceive the best thing for you is to leave the relationship. I will be hurt. However, I want you to be happy, however you perceive that to be necessary for yourself. The Libra and 7th house side of Venus also teaches us the principle of socialization. Learning how to behave and function in a group of people or a society. Aries 1st house through Virgo 6th house is self. Libra 7th house through Pisces 12th house is the other. So as the Libra 7th house archetype is the first archetype in the second half of the zodiac or the circle, it is again the archetype that starts to teach us about relationships. And as we go from learning how to be in a relationship one-on-one, learning that equality of relating, learning how to listen, learning who we are and who we are not, that gets broadened out into society, into a group of people that then teaches us how to behave in whatever society we were raised in. There is a lot of consensus conditioning to conform, and necessarily so, in order for any society to function together as a unit, to survive better together as a unit. Individualizing, what do I have to do to participate in the unit? But how can I learn how to do it without losing my sense of self? In the spirituating, it's being able to freely participate in that consensus path, however we need to from moment to moment, and yet not losing sense of that ultimate relationship with Source itself. It leads us to being able to see Source in all our relationships, and to do that with holding healthy boundaries in giving and receiving. What we are learning in that process, and especially as we're expanding into the individuated and spirituated states of consciousness, is learning healthy hellos and goodbyes. I have a tendency to tell clients that your hellos are only as good as goodbyes. You know how sometimes in a job, if it's easier to do if you're giving your 2-week notice and moving on rather than losing the job, but you'll have exit interviews. Healthy companies will do that. Why are you leaving? What do you perceive was missing in this organization? How can this company improve its relationships with its employees? Well, we do the same thing in intimate relationships. At least it would be helpful to do that from a more natural perspective. Why is the relationship not working for you? Why are you moving on? What is it you perceive that I could change about myself to have a healthier relationship next time along? Here's what I perceive you could improve upon for your next relationship. How many of those conversations have you had in relationships? If you can work to do that whenever the goodbyes are there for you, it will then help you moving forward with those hellos. It will help you have healthy boundaries from the get-go. It will help you share what your values in relationships are from the beginning so that you minimize expectations and projections. In natural law, our partners were chosen by the sense of smell, the pheromones. The Taurus and second house side of Venus rules the 5 physical senses in general. Sight, hearing, taste, smell, something other. But that also can get extrapolated then into Libra and the 7th house when it comes to the sense of smell. People who have heightened sense of smells have a strong Venus with aspects, or strong Taurus 2nd house, Libra 7th house in their chart. I have a south node of the moon in Taurus, and I've always had an extremely sensitive nose with regards to smell. And so what we used to do in natural law is, if the natural scent of a potential partner was repulsive, quote unquote, I'm saying this word broadly, bad karma. There's karma there. Address it, move on. If the natural scent of a partner is attractive, then good karma, and you move forward. See what the lessons are to learn. There'll still be karma, but there's something that is there that you're attracted to learn. If their scent is neutral, there's free choice in a hello or goodbye. And of course, in natural law, this choosing intimate partner through the sense of smell comes before the intimacy. It's a little tougher to do afterwards. Once there's been the exchange of intimacy and the exchange of sexual fluids, objectivity has a tendency to go out the window. All right, those are our slides on Venus. If there's any archetypes that I haven't discussed, by all means, in the Q&A board, type it out to Leroy. He can pass it along or unmute the lines. I'm going to move on here. Before I do, I have to take that good old drink of water when I'm rattling off. This next set of slides are going to repeat what we do every month, and I thank you for bearing with me, because this then allows the class to stand out as a standalone class separate from the series, in addition to being part of it. There's Venus, separate and part. So nodal axis astronomy. North node, south node, they're points in space where the moon's path intersects the plane of the ecliptic, the sun's apparent path around Earth. North node ascending node is where the moon's path crosses above the ecliptic. Weeks later, the moon's path crosses below the ecliptic, which is the south node or the descending node. Here is a visual of this for you. Here is the ecliptic, the sun's apparent path from our Earth geocentric perspective. Here's the moon's path going north of the ecliptic, and opposite here is the moon's path going south of the ecliptic. The nodal axis reverses or precesses through the zodiac, goes from Pisces to Aries. It makes a complete circuit every 18.5 years. The retrograde motion of the nodal axis in general will signify a return to universal source on a solar lunar level. The nodal axis is retrograde 90% of the time, it's direct 10% of the time. For those of you who were born with the nodal axis retrograde, the 90% of you, there is a stronger sense of destiny earlier in life. Those who were born with the 10% who were born with the nodal axis direct will have the sense of destiny come for them later in life. I was born with the nodes direct, and that has been the case for me. The 18.5-year revolution around the zodiac translates into the nodal axis transiting 2 signs approximately every 18 months. For instance, we currently have the North Node in Leo with the South Node transiting in Aquarius, and they are doing that for about 18 months until November of 2018. And I think they went into Leo Aquarius in May of 2017. The South Node archetype, this is the soul's ego from the past. It's the accumulation of all the emotional residues from our past lives. It represents security in general, as it is already known from the past. It can represent karma on many levels, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. It is a point of familiarity, positive and negative. From a positive perspective, it's gifts. It's those talents, those efforts we've made prior that come through into fruition. From a negative perspective, it's the Achilles heel. It is our weak link. It is the point that we are stuck in that needs to move. That South Node in general, though, can be a point of stagnation. From EA's perspective, it is the prior mode of operation on emotional or egotistical levels that allowed the prior karmic dynamic of Pluto to be actualized. In other words, wherever natal Pluto is by sign and house, in past lives it operated through that South Node on an egotistical or emotional level. You can look at the number of aspects that the South Node makes to determine additional details that was used in those past lives, and that includes the planetary rulers of the South Node by sign, its ruler by house, and the aspect that each of those aspects that each of those rulers make. And I will point out to you, for those of you who have Pluto Volume 1, all the examples used in the book were the South Node by sign. However, Jeffrey would say multiple times, and I ran his school from 2002 to 2008, and this was something I specifically questioned him on. Why did you not give any examples of the South Node ruler by house in Pluto Volume 1? Didn't think of it, but you use both of those South Node rulers and their positions by house sign and aspects. The North Node is the leading edge of development for the soul's ego in this time, this life. It is our emotional growth and evolution. However, it again represents that insecurity, as it is unknown or uncharted territory. It represents our dharmic responsibilities or the future, again, where we're striving to go. It's a sense of destiny with a magnetic pull forward. It is a point of movement versus South Node stagnation. It is the current life mode of operation on emotional or egoic levels that allows the evolutionary intent of the soul to be actualized. By evolutionary intent, we mean the Pluto polarity point, that opposite point of where Pluto is by sign and house. Now, of course, there are always exceptions to this. If Pluto's conjunct the North Node, there's no Pluto polarity point. You can refer you to other classes if you are a beginner and need to find more information about that. You can also look at the number of aspects that North Node makes to determine other details used to move the soul forward with its evolutionary intent. And of course, the same thing here. You will look at the planetary rulers of the North Node by sign and house, and where they are by sign, house, and the aspects they make to fill in even more details. We'll try to use these as example as we look at our chart for this class. In regards to the nodal axis as a unit, the past or south node and the future or north node are always in the tension of the present moment, which is the moon. You can look at this from a natal perspective in the natal chart. You can look at this from a transiting perspective of where south node, north node, and the moon are in the sky at any moment in time. Whether you're looking at it from a natal perspective or you're looking at it from the current moment, a transiting perspective, the past is always trying to shape the future in the present moment. In other words, there's that tendency to project the past forward for security reasons. And what the transiting nodal axis and transiting moon are allowing us to do is break free from the natal chart and the ways we want to project that past forward. Again, the retrograde mean motion of the nodes means progressively leaving the past behind and moving forward. Now, here is how we determine aspects to the nodal axis. As you can see, you will take the nodes clockwise from all the planets. And what this means is the planet becomes the starting point or the 0 point. And from the planet in question, you'll go clockwise till you reach the nodes. So in this example, I use the nodal axis relationship to Uranus. And so Uranus becomes the starting point or the 0 point, which is what you see right here in this lineup with Uranus. Take this outer circle, it goes all the way around clockwise till it gets to the north node. And the north node is making a waning or balsamic conjunction to Uranus. From the same starting point, which is the planet Uranus, if you follow the inner circle around, you get almost halfway around the chart to the south node, and the south node is making a waxing or gibbous opposition to Uranus. If you look at this by degree, Uranus is 19 degrees Gemini, 9 minutes. And you start with Uranus and you go all the way to this south node. The south node is 1936. If we went all the way and reversed to 19 degrees 9 minutes, it would be an exact opposition of south node to Uranus. It's not exact. It's going backwards, and it's not quite reversed back to 19 Sag 9 minutes. It takes a little bit of time to learn how to move it backwards. It's just like anything in astrology. It's practice, practice, practice. You don't play tennis the first time you go out and take a lesson. You're not really good at the first time you learn how to drive a car. But as you get practice with the gas pedal and the brakes, you get better and better and better. As you take more and more tennis lessons, you get better and you improve. The same thing with this. As you practice this with time, you will get to the point where you can actually see this visually just looking at the chart. And you learn to kind of automatically reverse those degrees and minutes as you're moving through. I'll give you another specific example here when we look at planets square the nodes. Matter of fact, here it is. When a planet is square the nodes from the perspective of evolutionary astrology, it is skip steps. Here's the math to it. Again, the nodes are always compared to a planet in a clockwise manner. So the planet, whichever planet it is the 0 point or the starting point or the foundation. In this case, we're going to use the planet Pluto, which is 16 degrees Virgo, 0 minutes. We start moving clockwise through the zodiac. I say you reverse through the houses, you reverse through the signs, and what is the first node you come to? The first node you come to is what EA will call the resolution node. That bottom line you're going to orientate to in resolving the skip steps. However, here's the math. Okay, in this case, the nodes are at 22 degrees Gemini. So in following this purple line, starting with Pluto, if we reverse through the zodiac, we have not yet got to 90 degrees. The nodes are actually applying squares to Pluto. The north node, everything is reversed here. The north node is an applying first quarter square. If you start with Pluto, you go 3/4 of the way around the zodiac to get to the south node. And the south node is an applying last quarter square to Pluto. It's actually what we call the crescent square with the north node, the disseminating square with the south node to Pluto. If you start with Pluto and you reverse through the signs or houses and the nodes were actually at 16 degrees Gemini Sag, the blue line here, it'd be exact squares. And if you start with Pluto and you reverse through the signs and the houses and the nodes were all the way to 12 degrees, as in this green line, they'd be separating squares. Here at the 12 degrees, even the 16 at exact, we call it that. But the 12-degree example, the north node's here. It is a first quarter square to Pluto. And if we start with Pluto and go all the way around, over 3/4 of the way around the circle to the green line here of the south node, it is the last quarter square. It's beyond the 270 degrees. By this I mean when the slower moving planet is the starting planet, this becomes the symbolic 0 in the 360-degree circle. And if this is the symbolic starting point or the symbolic 0, you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in a clockwise fashion till you get to whichever node you're looking at. Now, this is what's specific to determine nodal axis relationship, because all the nodes are compared to the planets. If it's Venus, even if it is the moon becomes the starting point. You go in a clockwise fashion to the nodes. Planets square the nodes, again, EA calls that skip steps. And in this case, both nodes, both the north node and the south node, were active in past lives. They were active in creating the karma in past lives. And the planetary archetype skips back and forth between those nodes. not integrating its archetypical lessons. Of course, today we're looking at Venus square the nodes. So everything that we looked at in our previous slides about archetypes with Venus is skipped, is stuck, sometimes I will say. It is not evolving. And so that planetary archetype is arrested. That planetary archetype, when it's Venus, all of those Venus principles in their archetypes that we looked at, again, they're stuck, they're arrested, they're not evolving. Now, Jeffrey Green would teach there's an exception to Sun square the nodes. The karma exists, but you don't really skip over the Sun if you look at it from the perspective as being the center of our solar system, and therefore the life force giving energy through which all of us operate. And all you have to do is think about how you discovered astrology. You discovered it probably through your sun sign. It is the window that all of us look to in opening the door to astrology and those 12 archetypes. Now, when the planetary archetype skips back and forth between those two nodes, again, we have to look for that resolution node to evolve through the skip steps. And just like I showed you, it's the node that last crossed over the planet. The nodes move clockwise. You start with the planet and you go clockwise to the next node or the first node you come to. Again, you start with the planet, you go clockwise, and in this example, the next node or the first node we come to is the north node. In this example, the north node would become the bottom line that all of the Sol Pluto skip steps must be resolved through in order for the evolution of the planet or Pluto to evolve. When the resolution node is the south node, that planetary archetype must be resolved through consistent application via the south node. This means the issues from the past must be readdressed and resolved. They will come up, you know, deja vu. Do I have to do this again? I thought I really dealt with these issues of self-reliance, Venus. Once you are doing this, it then allows for the north node to create that egoic movement forward. So south node, you must go back to the past, readdress it, resolve it for that north node to move forward. When the resolution node is the north node, that planetary archetype must be resolved through consistent application via the north node. That means the future north node becomes the bottom line. It's time to move forward. It's not about going back to the past, although that will come up, but it really is about consistently going forward, one step in front of the other, moving ahead. And as you do that, then that south node will be metamorphosed and break free from the past that it was stuck in. So we will look at some examples with this. However, as we have been doing here in this class series, I've also been doing a little bit of review, and I've got it in, never mind, I'm thinking multiple thoughts here. I like to put this in each one of these classes because it doesn't help to just review this whole generic circle of cycles and phases. And it's I started at the 0 degree point where we would naturally look at the ascendant or rising, the beginning of the first house, and you move in that counterclockwise fashion to get to the 8 phases and all of the specific aspects that are contained within the 8 phases. This is the natural way that the planets move through the houses and move through the zodiac. Now, when you're trying to determine the phase or aspect between any two planets, it's almost like you have to take this 0 degree point and slide it around the circle to wherever that slowest planet moving is. Now, here is why I've been putting this in here, because over the last few years, I've pondered this, I've thought about it, and I've decided, okay, it's time to change this slide. That is different from how I would how I taught it, you know, a couple decades ago, or when I ran Jeffrey's school. In determining aspects to planets, take the faster moving planet counterclockwise from the slower moving planet. So again, this is the moving planet. This slower moving planet is the starting point or 0 point. So in regards to Mercury here, if you look at the 2 planets right here, this line is not quite moving up to Pluto. I feel like I should make my graphics artist kind of slide it around a little bit, but Pluto's the slower moving planet. It is the starting point. And if you follow this line, which is supposed to match Pluto, and follow this inner circle in a counterclockwise fashion, you go all the way around the circle till you get to Mercury. Mercury is making a balsamic conjunction to Pluto. Venus is a new phase. Here's the line right here where the starting point is Pluto. You go just a little bit and you get to Venus. Venus is well, it's 11 degrees, so theoretically it's past the conjunction. It's new phase to Pluto in the example we're using here. Here's where I have shifted in my teachings. And I'm not the only one. Where I first heard about this was Laura Nabandian. And as I started pondering it, and for those of you who don't know this, Laura and Gregory Nalbandian from Seattle, and you know, love and blessings to Seattle right now, with the train derailment. Their parents, Maggie, and I cannot pronounce their dad's name, Nalbandian, they had a bookstore in Seattle for decades. And when Jeffrey first landed in Seattle, moving there from Southern California, or wherever he was traveling, and it was just a young pup deciding that he was going to teach astrology because he got over his judgment of it. He landed at their bookstore, and so Maggie took him under her wing, and Jeffrey taught out of astrology at all for years. And Laura was, you know, both Laura and Gregory were children, so they grew up with taking classes from Jeffrey. And how I actually started, just to show you, giving my age here, I knew a gal, and I've forgotten her name, but I knew a gal who lived in Seattle. I met her at a conference. She used to go to Jeffrey's classes, and she would transcribe them, cassette tapes. She would transcribe them on a typewriter, and she'd go to a copy shop and make copies, and I would buy copies of those classes from her. And she would mail them to me out here in South Dakota. But that's, you know, the Nalbandian history with Jeffrey Green's teachings. So I've come to agree with Laura on this, that we're, you know, if you look at Western astrology, planet Earth is right here in the middle. We're the geocentric perspective. And so I have come to want to compare the personal planets to the sun. In other words, I make the sun the starting point in regards to Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. And I compare the sun to the outer planets. So I make the outer planets the starting point, when the sun is involved. Jeffrey said all planets were compared to the sun. Pluto was compared to the sun. I just, as my own observation and correlations have just come to say it makes sense with the inner planets, but I compare sun to outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and Eris. So in this example here, when we look at the sun, and the example that I used is with Saturn, then Saturn, here's this green line. It's not quite matching up with Saturn, but Saturn becomes the starting point, or the 0 degrees. And you follow this circle as my arrow is showing you. It's more or less the outer circle. You follow that all the way around to the sun. And in this case, the sun is balsamic phase to Saturn. Again, Saturn is the starting point. You have to go all the way around the circle to get to the sun. So again, I just wanted to start putting this in this planetary series so that you can see the difference that how I've kind of shifted in some of my teachings. You know, Leroy always brings up the phrase, if evolutionary astrology doesn't evolve, what's it all about? And so I'm like, oh, okay, I kind of, yeah, you have a point there. I will figure out some way. I'm not the best expert on Facebook, but I will see if there's some way I can put these and share them via Facebook. I don't know if you can download PDFs from Facebook, or maybe I have to put these in the newsletter next month. I will make myself a note here, the PDFs. And what I'll also do is, hold on just a second, I'm making some notes right here. The other thing I have been wanting to do is put out a list of the classes since I shifted over into webinars in January of 2014. So I know how to share PDFs in via email. So when I put out next month's email for Mars Square the Nodes, look for those PDFs, because you'll be able to download them and print them out, so you've got some easy reference. With the listing of the classes, all you got to do is find the search function and put in the title of the class, and you can go directly to whatever class it is you are wanting to study. You can do that right now. Just use a keyword and see what classes it brings up, and see whether or not they're relevant to what you want to study. Okay, so that is the material that I have. So now we are to our class example for today. I'm going to stop, take another drink of water. Are there any questions before we move into chart example?
Is our volunteer on the line and mic'd?
Thank you for allowing me to have my water.
Wanda, are you there?
Mr. Leroy, he must be unmuting the line for our class volunteer. Do I have her on the line?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, sweetie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm okay. Thank you very much for volunteering your chart. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
You bet. I'm going to briefly repeat your birth data, environmental conditionings, basics of your chart. And then what we've been doing in this series is, if you've been able to listen to the first hour, I've been jumping into just feedback with what's sparking for you. And then I've been making sure that I get in some of the chart basics for everybody else. So let me just For class, our volunteer was born April 1st, 1966, 3:26 p.m. in Chicago, Illinois. She considers herself to be somewhere second, moving third, individuated. Environmental conditionings are lower middle class, loose Christian upbringing, although she broke away from it quite a while ago. She was an only child. She had a physically abusive mother when she was younger. She's ended the relationship with mother as of 2014. She had a one-time molestation by her father, who then had a heart attack shortly thereafter. As I read your ECs again, I thought, wonder what would have happened if father wouldn't have passed away. That might have been a blessing in disguise. She is in the middle of her second marriage. She is a stay-at-home housewife since she became debt-free, paying off her house and whatever debt she had. I thought that was relevant to Venus. Her first husband, I should say, this individual does have a military background as some of her career, and so did the first husband, if I'm remembering correctly, and he literally just disappeared. So she had to wait a certain period of time before she could get divorced via abandonment. She has no children. So for sake of the chart here, we are dealing with the first house Pluto at 16.5 Virgo. That's retrograde. Uranus is very, very tight conjunction, only 3 minutes new phase. You start with Pluto, slower moving planet, go to the faster moving planet. It is 3 minutes, not 3 degrees. Uranus is also retrograde. This volunteer has a south node at 26 degrees Scorpio in the third house. It's retrograde. This brings in the ruler by sign as Pluto, the soul here. The ruler of the south node by house, third house, is Mercury, which is over here retrograde at 22 degrees Pisces, 23 Pisces, seventh house, sandwiched in a stellium right here. Mercury is a new phase conjunction to Saturn, which is also a fairly tight conjunction, half a degree. Moving from 2233, starting with Saturn, you go to Mercury, you're 2258. That's more or less half a degree beyond. The north node is over here at 26 degrees Taurus in the ninth house. The ruler of the north node by sign is Venus over here at Aquarius in the sixth house. And the ruler of the north node by house is Jupiter over here at 24 degrees Gemini in the 10th house. Excuse me a moment, I'm getting distracted. Leroy, there's someone parked in our driveway, and I'm wondering if it is not Black Hills Power following up on your phone call. We've got a repairman here. If you want to come up the stairs, Leroy, I'll continue carrying on class with our volunteer, okay? And so I'm sorry, I got distracted, volunteer. I apologize for that. Rulers of the north node are in trine right here, but here's where I am again. Today's class is Venus square the nodes, and so we would start with Venus here at 25 Aquarius in the 6th, and because the nodes move clockwise, we're going to be reversing through the signs and the houses till the first node we come to. It just happens to be the south node. This is going to be the resolution node, and its rulers, Pluto and Mercury, are going to be involved in Venus resolving its skip steps, going back to reviewing whatever issues there are to the past. Now, I would also like to say that the South Node has its own aspect going on. It is a balsamic conjunction to Neptune. Let me take the time to do the math for you. You start with the planet, with any of the nodes, in this case, Neptune 2147 Scorpio retrograde. Starting with Neptune as the 0 point, we would reverse, go clockwise, reversing through the signs in the houses till we get all the way to the node. That is a balsamic conjunction to Neptune. And so we also have Moon over here with Venus in a gibbous opposition. When we look at Moon and Venus as a planetary pair, Venus is the slower moving planet. So we would start with Venus and we'd go in a counterclockwise fashion through the signs, through the houses, till we came to the Moon. It was not 25 degrees, which would be exact. It's only 21. The Moon is a gibbous opposition to Venus. They have their own relationship going on. Moon is square the nodes. Its resolution node very fast is the North Node. We can bring that into the picture later on. But what I think we're going to want to do is start with the Venus situation with the South Node. We can also bring in Venus and the Moon as well. Now, Volunteer, I know that you have done some studying of evolutionary astrology for a while. Like I said, I'd like to just turn it over to you and just let you free fall with whatever is sparking you relative to the points we have been making with Venus square the nodes. Are you comfortable with that, Venus?
I think so.
Go
And of
for it,
course,
sweetie.
you didn't have to apologize for, being distracted. Hey, third house South Node. Yeah, learning about distractions.
Well, that was relative to your chart, wasn't it?
Exactly. Exactly. I think that also kind of has applied to that Venus square to the nodes being in the sixth. That's something as far as my Venus that I have been having to learn is dealing with crisis, which end up being distractions in doing what I need to do, trying to be that that need. Getting over that need to be needed and learning when to give and when not to give, because there's been a lot of judgment and criticism and persecution once I've gotten to that point where I've gotten fed up with what's been going on by crisis made by individuals doing coming up with busy work and things that aren't relative to what needs to happen, what's going on, which draws my attention away because I'm having to put those fires out. Okay, as soon as you get this fire put out, here's another fire, that's been started. Instead of letting people resolve their own issues via the crisis that they have caused, instead of looking to me to fix it for them. That's been the biggest issue with me as far as I think Venus square the nodes, because self-reliance, that has never been an issue. I have always wanted to know how to do things for myself, learn how to do things for myself. I got my first job. Of course, now it was within the home. My parents owned a what's called a two flat. It's a building that had two apartments, one apartment on the first floor and one apartment on the second floor. And we lived in the first floor apartment, and then we rented out the second one. And my father talked to the tenant, and because he was looking for someone, to do some cleaning for him. So I got my first job at 16 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And my father taught me, even before then, taught me how to fill out income taxes, the 1040, because, back in my day, the 1040 EZ wasn't even out yet. The 1040A wasn't even out yet. So he taught me how to do taxes, balance a checkbook. I had to go to the grocery store for the family, learned how to cook, being the only child. And even though I was a girl, I had to get out there and shovel the snow, had to rake leaves, had to cut the grass, So self-reliance has never been, a thing for me. I taught myself how to sew. Of course, that was because of a class in grade school. Um, uh, it wasn't necessary. They didn't necessarily call it home economics. I can't remember the exact term. But it was one of those classes, and we got to choose, what we wanted to make for ourselves, to sew. And I happened to find one of those old black Singer sewing machines. The one with the wheel on the side.
Yep.
And the pedal, that you press. I happened to find it in the attic in this place that we moved to. And I drug it all the way downstairs into my room, and that's what I used to complete my project for school. And I made my first little A-line skirt, with the slit and the what do you call those things? The darts in the front. I was so proud of that thing, And that kind of spurred on other projects, teaching myself things to do. Like I wanted a pair of high heel shoes and my parents would not buy them for me. So I took this is crazy too, because I found a pair of shoes also in this attic that was left behind by the previous owners. And I took the heel off of a pair of sandals that I had, took the heel off of this other pair of shoes, and I somehow, I went downstairs and borrowed one of my dad's tools. He wouldn't let me use the drill. So I used a screwdriver and screws that are like, I guess you could call them like self-tapping screws to make the holes. And I actually put holes in the shoe and in the heel and connected those two together with screws and glue. Fortunately, I didn't break my neck. They did hold up for a little while, but I wanted high heel shoes and I did whatever, what was necessary to get them. Since I didn't have the money to necessarily buy them, I said, okay, I'll make them myself. So self-reliance is always been, even, from a young age, has not, never been an issue for me.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like the Venetian skip steps are not so much the Taurian second house side. It sounds like perhaps it might be more from the Libra seventh house side with
Yes.
relationships.
Yes.
And if I may just interject a little bit, and then we'll carry on. If you look at Neptune having conjunction with the South Node, and again, remember, South Node is balsamic conjunction, and a balsamic conjunction is resolving the karma, bringing lessons to completion, so that when that North Node moves over Neptune to the new phase conjunction, you get the rebirthing, you get the new beginnings. So balsamic conjunctions can have a tendency to be frustrating because it's, do I have to do this again? It's been there, done that, but yet there's still something that needs to be resolved here. And with it being Neptune is not always the best with boundaries. and it can get real confused, and it wants to merge with Scorpio. And so it can, go so deep merging with others on emotional levels. Where do I stop and where does someone else start? So if let me follow this through then. And so here we can see some of the codependencies that can come from relationships with just these two signatures right here, and the confusion third house that will come from this as well. What's mine, what's theirs? The North Node over here in Taurus, in this ninth house, North Nodes in Taurus are going to signify that there has been, and again, now remember, when planets are square the nodes, both planets were active in past lives. So what this North Node in Taurus will tell us relative to past lives, that this person has had some prior development with self-reliance, some prior development with their ability to ponder, ninth house. What do I need to do to survive? To ponder, ninth house, okay, pondering, kind of a right brain term. How do I create those clothes? How do I make those shoes that then will come into these values that I want? I also would say, if we start to bring in the whole relationship scenario, let me back up a minute here. We have a first house Pluto, and Uranus is a new phase, extremely tight conjunction. This is a double element of freedom. Don't fence me in. First house Pluto and Uranus new phase Pluto. I am breaking free from my old conditioning factors, my old soul patternings. However, relative to the first house being in opposition to the seventh, I like to tell people many times a first house Pluto will have as much karmic buildup in relationships as a seventh house Pluto. What happens for the first house Pluto is they, put their hands up and hold out the wall in regards to relationships. I don't know if I want to be in relationship because I'll lose my freedom, but I miss having a relationship. So the universe pulls me into it. And in this case, here, the relationship pulling her into it is these three archetypes over here in the seventh house and Pisces, and a deep, deep yearning for relationships. And if there's not a conscious spiritual path here relative to Pisces, what happens is there's an unconscious patterning, especially early on in life and in relationships, where they might unconsciously be projecting all kinds of ideals onto a partner, including their own yearning, relativity to be in relationships. So this starts to give us some clues here that this person also has some prior life experience with relationships. Saturn being at 22 Pisces is beyond the 16 degrees opposition. So this is full phase opposition that Saturn has to Pisces. They're trying to figure out this healthy boundary thing, this equality thing, becoming more and more conscious of that. This is going to start to feed in then with Mercury being the ruler of the South Node. Mercury's pulled into these relationship patterns as well, where I've recognized this. What I'm going to suspect from past life patterning with this soul is they have bounced back and forth between all their freedom and independence, ruler of the South Node, by sign being Pluto, and bounced into all of this relationship enmeshment with not having healthy boundaries. Ruler of the South Node by house being Mercury over here, and these two rulers of the South Node being in a full phase opposition to each other. The Mercury retrograde here is trying to throw off all of these ideals and projections and throw off the neediness part that still exists in this little independent soul. It's not complete here, okay? And so now what we have is Venus relative to being square these nodes is lifetimes in which the soul would get so caught up in overly committing and over enmeshment and codependency, the Scorpio 7th house stuff, until they felt like they just couldn't even breathe the 3rd house, and they would run over here to the North Node, Taurus 9th house, and may have gotten on their horse and ridden away and was never heard or seen from again. I'm talking about the chart example here, our volunteer. So what we have is the relationship codependencies, enmeshments with the relationships. I've got to be free. I think there might be some irony for this soul. So there wasn't equality in the relationships. There was the extremes here. We could also have perhaps had, relative to the Libra 7th house side, the extremes of inequality where there was the domination and the dominating. And I think, isn't it somewhat ironic that in this lifetime, it was the partner who ran off and disappeared? And so this person, this volunteer, our example here, then had to go through the shock of that abandonment, but they went through their own shock of really having a review, a deep psychological um, 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 uh, reviewing of how have I been in relationships? This isn't working. I've really got to go in and have a deep relationship with myself so that I feel free no matter who I am in relationship with. I would say that there probably was a whole complete metamorphosis that went on here for this volunteer. And relative to a 1st house Pluto, relative to this resolution node being in Scorpio, this wasn't someone who jumped into a gazillion relationships and figured it out by the 10th relationship. This was someone who actually could go into seclusion and deep pondering here to figure out these patterns, and then would go forth into the next relationship. Would you say this is accurate for you, volunteer?
Actually, it's now it is. I have to say, and I was going to bring that up. My other lesson was that self-love,
Mm-hmm.
because I always, even as you know, especially once you became a teenager, I wanted that relationship, and I did not use discernment in almost all of the relationships. I mean, might as well be honest about it. In pretty much all of the relationships that I've had, I did not use discernment because there was always red flags where I should have said, okay, yeah, nice. It was a great, time out. See ya, move on. And I didn't do that, because of that ideal and that so wanting to be in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
What you were describing didn't really start coming along, even though I was already in relationship with my husband. We weren't married yet. But that draw back to the independence really didn't start coming until I started hitting those midlife transits.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you're saying that early on there could have been, series of multiple relationships where you weren't using that discrimination. You just did
Yes.
the 3rd house move on, move on, move on without doing the deep Scorpio reflection that was needed. What's my role in it?
No, it wasn't a move on. I really actually merged, didn't use that. Remember earlier that you mentioned about the pheromones.
Got it.
And now I'm a sucker for cologne, good smelling men's cologne. I just absolutely okay. Being honest here, laying it out on the table. And I think that probably got me into trouble, because it was like, you get a good smelling men's cologne, I'm hooked,
Mm-hmm.
Didn't
There you
use
go.
that, even though a lot of the other red flags popped up, didn't pay them any attention. And I was almost with just about every relationship, it was like, okay, yeah, this is the one, we're going to get married and, live happily ever after.
Gotcha. So as you then, went back and dealt with all these relating patterns and learned to, let's say, pay attention or trust or hear those red flags, so that you could get better, with discerning, better with healthy giving and receiving, and, checking out before you then gave. This had the effect of then having Venus be able to go, or the North Node be able to be developed into deeper and deeper self-reliance while you would be in relationship and committing to someone else.
Yes.
Rather than, again, not having those healthy boundaries and giving yourself away too much in relationships.
Right. And like I said, that pretty much came really much later in my relationship with my current husband now. And I think a lot of that was due to cultural and family kind of pressing upon me that you're not going to have a relationship. No man is going to want you the way you are. So I changed, I guess you say changed a lot about myself in order to be in a lot of these relationships. And that's probably why they ended, because, the evolution is like, no, you can't do that. You have to liberate from, from these prior and status quo relationship patterns.
And you weren't being necessarily true to yourself.
Yes.
Because this, you describe some of the, sixth house archetypes of the Venus with, the crises and taking on, responsibility for always helping everybody else. But, Jeffrey had a lot of interesting write-ups about Venus in, Aquarius. And I would refer everybody to his old book on Uranus if you haven't gotten a copy of that. And where, we'd have that Saturnian reaction to Aquarius, and we'd want to pull back and defend the past and be in consensus. Then we'd have that, rebellious action to Aquarius, where we'd want to, break free and be who we are. And then we had that middle part where we would ebb back and forth without necessarily being true to ourselves. We'd be in part of that Saturnian, excuse my burp again, that Saturnian conforming consensus world, and a little bit of that, break free, be me, but we would just ebb and flow. And that could get caught up here in all of this relationship karma that you've had. And if I may, I'm going to bring in this moon opposition, because it's the gibbous side of the opposition. And, you know, Moon in Leo is going to be about self-love, but it's really interesting here when you put it into the 12th house, because it's also a deep unconditional love of self. It is more of a conscious love of self. But Moon in the 12th house is another one of those factors where when you're emotionally involved or intimately involved, you don't know what's yours or what's them. And you've needed this Moon to be there in Leo by sign. And as it's pushing this gibbous opposition closer and closer, to be exact, with Venus, every relationship that you've went through has made you stronger and stronger in, this is me, this is who I am, this is who I'm not. You know, Moon has been involved in these planets square the nodes as well. And the resolution node for the Moon, this is what's been feeding that self-reliance. This is what was in this picture when she said earlier, I've always, you know, been interested in the survival skills to take care of myself, because emotionally, with the resolution node being this north node up here in Taurus and ninth house, it could be what she literally had to do in past lives as a child. And so she had come in willing to develop that and willing to emotionally move forward with this and taking care of herself. So she's fine when she's by herself. Again, the hiccups would come when you'd get in the relationships and not hold a healthy sense of self, or held healthy boundaries in giving and receiving with partners. So briefly, just wanted to get a little bit of that in for any listeners. And volunteer, welcome to your feedback too, if you want.
Yeah, I wanted to add, I was going to bring that in and you had already done that. The other part of that that was driving the self-reliance is, as we've talked, since I've been a chart volunteer before in other classes, there was a very tenuous relationship with both the mother and the father. It was, I never really felt like I was wanted and comfortable at home. And there was always the saying that, you know, at 18, you know, once you turn 18, we don't owe you anything else. So I think that drove a lot of the self-reliance. And then I had an incident with an aunt when I got out of the military. I asked, could I, you know, live with them until I got myself together? Not in the same place that I was born, which is where my parents were still living. I did not want to go back there. You know, that was just very pointless. And after a while, just out of the blue, my aunt told me that I needed to move. You know, basically she was putting me out. I was in college at the time, and that was, you know, the thing that she's, you know, said as well was that you need to, you know, quit school and get a job and, you know, basically get the heck out. So I just, you know, went into, of course, I'm shocked because this was the one family member that I thought that I could count on. Oddly enough, she's a Libra. She was a Libra sun. So I just was like, you know, after it took me a minute to just kind of get over the shock, I said, okay. And, you know, immediately left to start looking for a place. And then about, I want to say a few months later, and it may not even been that long, like I don't have the exact timing because of the shock. Like I say, this was the last person I thought that would come from. You know, I would have expected that from other family members, but not her. So it was shortly after that I found out that my parents were going to move, you know, back to where my aunt was living, where I currently live now. So the family convinced me to, move in with them, get a place together, move in with them. And then the old stuff started with my mother again. And I just, again went back to the same place, oddly, that I had been looking at getting a place, from when my aunt said I had to move. And all of a sudden, they had a place, because a place that came available, because this was a pretty kind of popular apartment complex, and they did not have vacancies that often. And then I ended up moving, back out. And after a few years, then I decided to buy my own home, because those two incidences, and the prior, as far as the home life and the tension, the tensionous relationship between my folks, no one was ever going to tell me that I had to get out. I was going to have a place to stay. So that drove the self-reliance, that drove the wanting to pay off all of my debt, including my mortgage.
Yeah, the Venetian shocks with relationships that have to shock you into, what do I value versus self-sacrificing myself. And the South Node in Scorpio too would be bringing part of those relationship shocks. In your case, it's even been with the family of origin.
Yes.
The Saturn opposition to Pluto, the Moon opposition to Venus. As we all know from the deeper EA perspective, we choose our parents. You chose those parents so you could really break free from the karma with them. And they became the teachers to really help you move into those deeper and deeper levels of self-reliance. Sometimes when you have Venus in Aquarius and Venus in the 11th house, we're not always in touch with what we value. We're looking at what society projects onto us to value. Or we can be in that fixed air where it's kind of like we're always feeling on the outside looking in. Everybody else is doing it. Everybody else has got it. But, I just got my nose up against the storefront window. So with Venus in Aquarius or the 11th house, you'll have those Venetian shocks from time to time, just to get you in touch with what is of most important value for you. And that sounds like what it was describing. And again, allowing you to just really have the sharp instincts and knowledge and awareness that you didn't get the love from your family of origin, so you are going to deepen how you get it from yourself. And as that moves that self-value and self-worth along, that's going to help with your discrimination of relationships. If the family of origin causes us pain, that's what we expect the universe to do. And so that in many ways, even though it may not seem related, it could have been the lessons learned were extrapolated out into the intimate relationships as well. How is relationship with husband now? How long have you been married?
It'll be 13 years. I think that's right. 13 years in January. So it's pretty good. Fortunately, he has Sun conjunct Uranus, so he's been a big help as far as that freedom, and even discovering that freedom was an essential need for me, and that because there's been a big thing as far as my family of origin, that because I'm a female, I'm supposed to be in service to my mother, regardless of what she does, how she, how she is. She wants me to be her parent. And they are expecting me to totally give up my life to, you know, meet her need. Even though a lot of the health crisis that she's going through now have been caused by herself. But I'm supposed to give up my life to, to take care of her. And my husband has been hugely instrumental in getting me to see the pattern, though I noticed it before he did. But being, how do I say, I guess because of our relationship, because she revealed some of her, those patterns that I was seeing, he got to see them as well, where the other family members didn't, per se.
Yeah.
Or they would still, and they still do to this day, take her side. Even though she's shown them, how she is, they still take her side over mine. So
There's
he's been extremely helpful with that.
Well, and I'd say the Sun Uranus conjunction with partner, he's probably also been helpful with objectivity. And the Venus opposition, or excuse me, the Moon opposition to Venus, the gibbous side being in the 6th, 12th, there's the being sucked back into guilt by the parents, and the skip steps around that, the whole power over, power under, the whole freedom and abandonment. There's been all kinds of stuff that's probably been mixed up with mother for lifetimes. Yeah. So congratulations on the healthy boundaries.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Like I say, he's been very, very instrumental in that. And I think it's probably more so that he's a Cancer sign. It's Sun conjunct Uranus in Cancer. So he's not, doesn't like that confrontation or when I'm angry because of that, So I think it was to help sort of keep the peace and to get me to break away from that so that there's peace in our own house.
Gotcha. Well, and his son Uranus then could possibly fall right here in the 11th house. So this would
it's 10th and the 11th house, because he also has other planets, Moon in Cancer and Venus in Cancer. So that falls in the 11th, but his son Uranus falls in the 10th.
There you go. And helping you more and more with objectivity. Thank you for volunteering. Any questions on your part?
My question is, and this probably will help, I think, others as well, because I'm still kind of struggling with that. Because we have this conditioning with the give, when you exercise that learning when to give and when not to give, that gets turned into, well, you're not being or not giving unconditional love. So can you extrapolate on that? Because I think it will help others, especially who has Venus square the nodes.
And these Pisces planets in the 7th house that, is learning this lesson of healthy boundaries. When somebody comes back at you with the statement that they just made, and, for instance, if this was your mother, stating that, you have to go within and see how it feels for you instinctively in your own gut, and discern whether or not that's a manipulation. Because it is a very subtle thing to be able to discern that. And what can happen with the human-made distortions that will come from 6/12 Virgo Pisces is we'll be made to feel guilty. And then we'll go, okay, well, this is, I suppose I need to do this. I need to step up to the plate and help them one more time. You know, I need to be the one to do the giving. Sometimes it calls for you to literally be able to remove yourself from the relationship, to physically distance yourself from the situation and or the person, to be able to have some inner reflection to discern what's healthy or what's not healthy. Sometimes it also helps to have an objective person be able to come through and give you feedback. And that objectivity may not be the partner, it may not be a friend. You have to be able to filter through where they may be coming from. Are they just being loyal to you? You know, sometimes that objective feedback will come in counseling mode, you know, or perhaps even a casual acquaintance mode where you can, you know, talk about it and they can objectively listen when they don't have any vested interest in your well-being or happiness. They're just hearing the information and giving feedback. So, in other words, it doesn't always come through in a crystal clear black and white, but you've got to go within. How does it feel? How does it feel? How does it feel? And you ask that question inwardly of yourself again and again and again until you can start to arrive at an answer for yourself. In your case, with this South Node here, Scorpio 3rd, again, you get emotionally confused. And Neptune, where do I end and someone else start? Same thing with Pisces in the 7th house. Where do I end and someone else start? Sometimes with oppositions, you've literally got to have the confrontations to get clear. And I haven't brought this in yet, but if you look at Mars in my new understandings, inner planets compared to Sun becomes the starting point, the slower moving planet. Not the slower moving planet, but the starting point in this case. You go towards Mars. Mars is, you know, a new phase conjunction, Aries 8th house. You're breaking free from a lot of relationship codependency and manipulations in this lifetime. So you've got, you know, some multiple signatures in your chart, and you've got Jupiter over here. We haven't talked about Jupiter, ruler of this North Node by house. You've got Jupiter in Gemini. So here's a signature of switching left brain, right brain, left brain, right brain. Mercury's in a right brain sign, but it's retrograde. Here's a signature of, you know, the confusion between trusting your gut, trusting your instinct, you know, trusting the intuition when it comes through. It's going to take practice to be able to detach and objectify, to do it inwardly for yourself, and then be able to learn how to have the relationship communications with sources who can give you objective feedback, because again, they have no vested interest in your well-being on an intimate level. Helping?
Yes, thank you.
Because when we have that whole dominated Libra 7th side of Venus, there will be those manipulations around unhealthy giving and receiving to keep the dominated one sucked in. And in your chart patterning, that sucking in will be done through guilt and crises. And especially with, you know, mother getting involved here. And so it takes, you know, supreme effort for you to hold those healthy boundaries. Why do you think you're coming in at first house Pluto with Uranus here? To get you into
Yes.
anger when those manipulations are going on.
And that's
Anger.
exactly what happened, as far as to actually get me to the point of where I actually had to just say I cut the relationship off, because I actually sat down and talked with her when I confronted her. And I told her, you know, I asked her, hey, I'm a grown woman. You're a grown woman. I think at that time I was 47. Like, I'm almost 50 years old. This is not a, yes, I understand that you're my mother, but I'm not a little child. Because she would always, you know, would say, oh, I'm your mother, you know, that hierarchical, you're going to do what the heck I say and do whatever I want you to do, even though you're almost 50 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave her that option. I said, this is how this relationship from this point on is going to have to go. We relate as equal adults.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't like that. So that's when I got even more angry and said, forget it. That's it. Cut the relationship off.
Mm-hmm. Congratulations on the healthy boundaries. And probably all of us recognize it's not an easy thing that you're doing.
No, it's not, because the guilt still comes. The manipulations, she still continues to manipulate to try to suck me back in, and the manipulations she steps them up each time.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Hopefully this has helped answer your question a little bit.
Yes, it has. It definitely has.
Okay. All right. If I'm going to check in with Leroy. Leroy, any burning questions from the board? I know we went over a little bit, but just want to check in with you one more time.
Nope, you're all clear.
Okay, all right. And hopefully for the associate I had the phone call with earlier today, if you're on the call, I tried to be very slow and deliberate in helping out with that cycle of phases and aspects and determining, excuse me, aspects with the nodal aspects with the nodal axis, and aspects between planets. So hopefully that was cleared up for you some. Volunteer, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you. And
Thank you.
I guess I'm gonna see you in a couple of days when the EA Zoom meetings on Facebook have a free forecast for 2018. Correct?
Yes, I will be there.
Okay, so if anybody is on Facebook, you're not aware of the EA Zoom meetings, by all means, when you're on Facebook, just search their page and like them, request to be a part of the group. And I got to give you mountain time, Thursday evening from 7 to 9 p.m. mountain time. I'm going to participate with our volunteer and several other people on giving 5 and 10 minute forecast on various subjects in 2018, to be followed by a Q&A afterwards. So thank you, volunteer. Thank you, everyone else. And I will see you the third Tuesday in January for Mars Square the Nodes. Solstice blessings, everyone. Have a great holiday with your loved ones. Adios.